Hearthstone has just combined two of my favorite keywords in the game. Dragons and Deathrattles. And oh boy, are these warrior cards looking absolutely bonkers. It's card reveal season, which means that it is time to make a bunch of speculation about what is garbage, what is good, what is unplayable, and what will probably see a lot of meta relevance dominating the ladder. And we're just gonna go ahead and jump right into it. But before we start talking about these cards, I want to show you guys the best website that you can get all of the up-to-date information, considering that the Hearthstone website doesn't seem to be the best place to get all this information, which is kind of sad in my opinion. But HearthstoneTopDecks.com/Into the Emerald Dream expansion guide is exactly where you can get all the up-to-date information. And even when a card is just recently released, you can go to this forum and it'll have all of the new recent releases ready to go. So if you have missed anything, if you feel like there's a card that you're not sure if you saw yet, go ahead and check out this website for all the up-to-date information about these card reveals. So let's go ahead and take a look at these warrior cards. One thing to keep in mind about these card review videos is that I am going to be looking at what is possible within the scope of what we are seeing so far. All of the neutral cards have been released, as well as all of the warrior cards. So we debatably could already start making these warrior decks and creating a perfect list for what we think might be the direction to go with these archetypes. And I'm just going to tell you right now, Dragon Warrior, Menagerie Warrior, different versions of Hydration Warrior are all going to look like they have a lot of support within this expansion. So let's go ahead and start with one of the basic cards. Darkrider, a 1-mana 1/1 battle cry. If you're holding a dragon, discover a dragon with a dark gift. So this is just like a great way of getting some menagerie value as soon as turn 1, to where you can get a random dragon that'll probably be played sometime in the mid game, because with these dragons, there are not really a lot of low curve dragons that are possible. So the idea of getting something immediately playable out of the Darkrider is really not something that is going to be all that common. If anything, you are more likely going to be discovering a card between 4 to 6 mana. So you have like a mid-range, maybe, beginning of late game card that you'll discover. But there's a lot of decent dragons that are in this this pool of cards that we'll be talking about that are very good to discover. One of them being a 4-mana 6/6. So if you were to just discover that out of nowhere, that's a great card that you can play as soon as you have the mana available to you. And then you have the Dark Gift to potentially give it like Charge, Lifesteal, Elusive, and a bunch of these other stuff that I'm still not 100% sure of all the dark gifts yet. But needless to say, I really feel like this card is going to be very good in Menagerie Warrior, and maybe even like an aggressive Dragon Warrior that just wants to play for curve. And the next card that we have is Broodkeeper, a 2-mana 2/3 minion. Battle cry: if you're holding a dragon, equip a 2/2 sword. Now this definitely is more support for the aggressive dragon archetype for warrior, and having a weapon is actually very good at keeping up your board pressure, removing your opponent's minions, while also building up your own game plan. In the great words of J. Alex, you're building up your own tempo while removing your opponents, and this is a great card to help you give yourself a little bit of wiggle room in the early game so you can stick some minions. But the biggest thing that's kind of drawing back this card, in my opinion, is that this feels like a card where if you don't play it in the early game, the later you play it, the worse that it gets. So if an aggressive version of this deck actually really wants this type of card, it'll definitely see play in an aggressive aggro dragon warrior. But if aggressive aggro warriors don't want to run dragon packages, then this card becomes a little bit worse if you compare it against everything else that is available right now. So I think that this card has some potential of seeing some play, but if we're not putting this in an aggro dragon deck, I have a lot of suspicion that this card may not see play whatsoever. Next up, we have Ominous Nightmares, which is a little bit of an interesting card because we have a Whirlwind effect that is finally being added into this set, since we do not have Whirlwind in the core set, but it also has a secondary effect because a lot of classes, actually all the classes, are getting choose one cards now, because this entire theme of the expansion is Druids in the Emerald Dream. So every single class is getting a choose one card, and the Warrior choose one card is either deal 1 damage to all minions, or give a damaged minion +2/+2, so we have some honest to God enraged support. Now, when I first read this card, I thought it said give all damaged minions +2/+2, which would be an obscene effect for a 1-mana card. But for 1 mana, just giving a minion +2/+2, there's you know, a few ways you can get value out of this out of the early game. You could potentially set up a combo with it in terms of dealing damage to a minion, then buffing it, and then utilizing it if it has like lifesteal or something like that, or rush. Not exactly the most insane thing in the world, but with some of these other cards that have now been released for Warrior, this card does seem like it is at least a little bit better, depending on how exactly you want to build the deck or how you want to utilize this card. Because you could just put it in Control Warrior as just, you know, as a fancy whirlwind, or maybe you can like buff up a taunt later on as the game develops. But odds are this is going to be a very good card in some tempo-based warriors that really just want to have early board domination and tall minions very quickly. In keeping with the trend of 1-mana spells, we are looking at Siphoning Growth, a 1-mana warrior spell that destroys a friendly minion to gain 8 armor. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is a Warlock card. This looks like a Warlock card. The effect looks like it's a Warlock card. The only way that this is a Warrior card is because it's red and has armor printed on the card. Because this is very similar to Dark Pact. However, the reason why this is very good in Warrior is because some other cards that we will be looking at have legitimate Deathrattles that you may want to proc immediately. And some of these Deathrattles are going to be very, very juicy. So this is a kind of a setup card leading up to some of these other cards that we're going to be talking about. But, you know, in other situations, you can just get rid of a useless 1/1, gain 8 armor, and then you're just kind of chilling, depending on what matchup you're going up against, depending on if this is something that you need for stall. Unfortunately, the way that I look at a card like this is that Warrior's not going to run this in order to gain armor. Warrior is going to run this in order to proc Deathrattles, which is a lot more important than gaining armor, because you have so many ways of gaining armor in Warrior. It's essentially just an extra bonus to encourage you to want to play Deathrattle minions. So I think that this is a really good spell. I think that once we get to some of these other cards later in the video, you're going to understand why this card is bonkers. But yeah, Warrior's getting honest to God Deathrattle support now, and I love it. Next up, we have Eggbasher, a 4-mana 3/5, deal 1 damage to a minion and give it 4 attacks. So if you remember that Quillbore that was in, I think, Festival of Legends, I forget exactly what the name is, pretty good card, except now it's a warrior exclusive, and even when the minion dies, it still is going to have that extra attack buff. So it's not exactly having all of the weaknesses that the Quillbore was known for, and this just has all of the benefits. Another way that you can look at this is that it's a better Cruel Taskmaster, which is a lot more in line with what warrior cards are. But yeah, Egg Warrior, literally giving us the Eggbasher as a legitimate card that could be put into some kind of Enrage Warrior or Deathrattle Warrior that wants to stick a lot of minions. I think there's going to be a lot of tempo-based options that are available for Warrior, and honestly, couldn't be happier about it. But this next card is either going to make you frustrated or really happy. Because we have a 10-mana, 130 taunt elusive legendary warrior minion. After this takes damage, gain 1 armor and give this minion +1 attack. So essentially, if you just keep dealing damage to it over and over and over and over again, you gain a little bit of armor as well as a little bit of attack on the minion. Now, before you guys start thinking about what's good with this card, yes, Crazed Alchemist. It's the first thing that a lot of people are thinking of, to where Reddit has already come up with this meme. Just play Warsong Commander and then play Crazed Alchemist with it on 15 mana, and warriors have a lot of ramp nowadays and can go above the cap of 10 mana, so there is a lot of goofy things that are possible, at least in the wild format. Now, in terms of standard, I'm not really sure how exactly to rate this card, other than the fact that you are going to be able to bring back this card several times because of Hydration Station, and 30 HP is still 30 HP to have to chew through. Like, Black Knight could be a card that could come back in order to destroy some taunts, but if you're going to be bringing this card back a whole bunch of times, Black Knight really doesn't help you with that. So unless you're making multiple copies of destruction tools of some kind, I really feel like this card is going to outlast any kind of tech card that you can run against this. But even so, what if there's, on the other side of the field, what if you decide to run Crazed Alchemist in order to make this thing have 1 HP and then you just get rid of it that way? Maybe Crazed Alchemist is not just going to be a win condition card, but a legitimate tech tool that we need in order to destroy cards like this. I don't think that circumstance is going to happen, but it is just really goofy how this legendary minion has some very legitimate uses in the game. Remember in Hydration Druid, where we were using the 1/3 from Druid in order to draw a taunt minion from our deck and discount it by 2 mana? Yeah, that's an 8 mana Tortolla. Or you could still play your 7 mana Ziliax. You could even do something like playing a Dungar in Warrior because of all of the ramp that is available to them. So I don't know, dude. This kind of card has a lot of potential viability. It's just whether or not this ability is going to work in the vacuum of what else is happening in the meta. If there's a lot of aggressive decks and you don't have time in order to put out these taunts and delay your opponent, a card like this isn't going to be very good. But if delaying is very, very good in this meta, feels like this card is going to be an S tier 5 out of 5 card for sure. However, it just needs a meta to build around it. And now we're going to be talking about some of the dragons, some of the Deathrattles that are available in this expansion. And these are some of my favorite cards that I have seen from the reveal so far. These cards legitimately make me want to play more Hearthstone, and I'm really hoping that you guys get a similar effect because I love dragons and I love Deathrattles. Seeing them combined like this really does have me excited, and when you think about how good these cards are as well, I mean, a 4 mana 6/6 dragon, which you can, again, discover extra copies of and even give a dark gift to. It is a battle cry, deal 3 damage to all other friendly minions, but then Deathrattle, deal 3 damage to all enemy minions. So remember that card that ate a minion? What if there's a circumstance to where you really don't care about the body, but you just care about having that AoE damage? Now for 5 mana, you could effectively clear a lot more minions a little bit easier, and you have the Deathrattle synergies that are very, very important. Now, why would I care about any of these Deathrattles? What are some cards that would make me care about Deathrattles? How about this 2 mana warrior location, Clutch of Corruption? 2 mana, 2 durability, warrior location. Choose a friendly dragon, summon a 0/2 egg that hatches into a copy of that minion. So if you decided that you wanted to have a bunch of 6/6s on the field, you could play Clutch of Corruption in order to give yourself a copy. Now keep in mind, if it has a dark gift on it, then this would hatch into a copy that has the dark gift on it. So I'm pretty sure that's how the interaction works, but there's a lot of other cards that you might be thinking about. Well, hold on a minute. If we want to make a copy of that dragon, what if we may want to make a copy of another dragon? And this next dragon is going to sell you on not only Dragon Warrior itself, but Dragons and Deathrattles. We're just going to go ahead and take a look at it. It is Ysondre. Ysondre. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. But it is a 7 mana, 8/5 Taunt Deathrattle Dragon. Summon a random dragon for each time Ysondre has died this game. If you guys don't know, one of my favorite legendaries in Hearthstone's history is N'Zoth the Corruptor, bringing back a whole bunch of Deathrattle minions, potentially getting the chance to do that over and over again, so you just have a wall of unbelievably powerful minions that when they die, they do something useful. So now suddenly being able to play Clutch of Corruption on top of your Ysondre and having even more value, that is this is exactly the kind of card that I love, to where, yeah, you could go into the late game and create a bunch of Ysondres and then have a bunch of random dragons that pop up, but this could also be a card where it's like, after the 3rd one, you probably just might have lethal. So this might create like some kind of mid-range deck that has a lot of early game tempo, very similar to like Secret Paladin back in the day, to where you don't necessarily need this big late game card in order to win, but it is now a way that you can very legitimately outvalue some of these control decks while the tempo is being brewed. And this is just one of my favorite ways of playing Hearthstone, playing mid-range and not just going for the curve every single time. I have actual late game strategies that I want to pop off, and I'm just really excited to mess with this card in particular. I would have to do the math on how good a random dragon actually is, but in this video, I have also included all of the neutral dragons that'll be appearing in the Emerald Dream, so that way you can have an idea of what cards might be happening from this card. However, the other thing to keep in mind is that it is dragons all across all the classes. So you're not just going to be getting neutrals or warrior cards, but at least we'll have an idea of what kind of dragons will be in the deck to help support this this kind of dragon in order. And then we can really see how powerful this effect is after we utilize the best version of this deck. So there's a lot of potential for this card. I really like the idea of it. And Deathrattles, again, are some of my favorite keywords in the game. I'm just really excited for a card like this existing. And then to put a beautiful bow on top of everything, Succumb to Madness is going to be a way to legitimately make this archetype sing. If you weren't sold on the card previously, I really hope that you're sold now, because 3 mana, Succumb to Madness, discover a friendly dragon that died this game, re-summon it. So this is going to be a very interesting deck building decision, because obviously if you have more than 3 dragons in the deck, then Ysondre is going to get a little bit problematic to bring back from the Succumb to Madness. But while also on the same exact front, if you get a bunch of value from your Ysondre, then suddenly getting you Succumb to Madness value is going to be a lot harder. So this is one of those cards to where the first couple of times, yeah, you can guarantee the Ysondre, but if you play this card a little bit later as you're making your copies, it might become a little bit more clunky. So deck building is going to be very important, finding that perfect blend of dragons, minions, and defensive tools in order to kill your opponent. I just love cards like this, and this reminds me a lot of Hydronox Druid, which was another deck that I really did enjoy. A lot of people may not remember the wall taunt Druid decks with a lot of positive memories, but I like those decks. I like those decks a lot, and honestly, I feel like we really are going back to a board-based Hearthstone, and an archetype like this just really makes me want to play the game. Now, I'm not going to go over all of the neutral cards that are available at the moment, but what I have decided is to show you all the dragons as well as one other card that I really do believe could fit into this style of deck. And one of them is Tranquil Treant, a 2-mana 2/2 Deathrattle. Both players gain an empty mana crystal. This is a neutral card. This is available for Hunter with Terrascale Stalker. This is available for Warrior with destroying a minion, so you can just get the mana immediately. But the one thing to keep in mind about this kind of card, whoever kills this minion is effectively giving their opponent an extra mana going into the next turn. So there might be some circumstances where you as the warrior, you just want to kill this because you just want the mana guaranteed next turn. But depending on how this card gets traded, there are certain thresholds that you're able to skip. So if I play this on turn 2 and then my opponent immediately kills it going into the next turn, I don't have to worry about a 3-drop. I can immediately start playing my 4-drops, and that can sometimes matter depending on the matchup. So having some extra ramp tools, especially if you're going to try and build a deck around the 130 taunt, this might be one way of going about it, but at the same time, you are technically ramping your opponent. It may not be the greatest thing in the world, but if you can take advantage of that ramp and your opponent cannot, then this just seems like a no-brainer in the deck as like an easy, as a secondary ramp tool that you definitely want in a warrior deck. So I think that this card is going to be very interesting to evaluate once we actually start playing it. Now, the rest of the neutral cards are primarily the dragons. What are some random dragons that we could either hope to generate or potentially some other dragons that we might want to physically put into the deck? We have Briarspawn Drake, a 10-mana 12/7, very interesting stat line. At the end of your turn, attack a random enemy minion. Excess damage hits the enemy hero. So suddenly you have a win condition that you could randomly generate depending on the game, depending if you have a bunch of Ysondre value. Or maybe you're playing a late game oriented dragon warrior that just wants to play this card, maybe make some extra copies of it with the, what's it called? The location, the Clutch of Corruption. It could be a very legitimate way of making even more minions that deal a lot more burst damage. Now, this is a 10-mana card. It feels like it might be a little bit harder to get some value out of depending on the warrior deck. But that's where warrior having ramp really does make a difference, because now you don't have to worry until turn 10 to finally lay down this card. Maybe you get lucky and you can play this card as early as like turn 6 or turn 7 or something like that. Warrior does have trail mix as well, dude. It's just very concerning, all of the ramp that is available to warrior, to where I immediately dismissed this card when I looked at it on my stream earlier today. But now that I've been thinking about it, there is some very real potential with this card. It's just a matter on whether or not the StarCraft stuff is going to overshadow this. I really hope that we don't repeat that. Next up, we have Yeti on a dragon. R.I.P. Yeti, you're never coming back into the game. 4 mana, 4/4 Taunt Deathrattle. Shuffle 2 4/5 dragons with Taunt into your deck, except they are summoned with Drawn. So that's a really cool ability. We're not really seeing that many of these types of cards. I don't think we've really seen a card like this since like Ysera, you know, the Ysera Unleashed, where you can shuffle dragon portals into your deck. There might have been like another card that summons like a 2/2 or something, but I don't know, dude. I kind of like this. I kind of like this ability. You have some ways of playing defensively in order to delay into the late game, which is exactly something that you need with these kind of Dragons decks. Now, do I really think that 4 or 5 taunts by turn 4 are that insane? Not really, but since we're slowing down the game, maybe taunts are going to make a very legitimate difference now, because you're not just going to summon a bunch of minions to just get immediately deleted by an AoE. I feel like we're losing a lot of AoEs. But board-based gaming is definitely in the front of attention when it comes to cards like this. I love the design on the board actually mattering more than anything right now. Next up is a dragon that I feel like is definitely going to go in a lot of warrior decks, because just look at this synergy. 3 mana, 2/4 dragon, Deathrattle, draw a spell that costs 5 or more. Hydration Station, anybody? This is just a guaranteed way of drawing Hydration Station, Sleep Under the Stars. If you're going to go for a Chemical Spill combo, you could potentially get this card to get Chemical Spill from the deck, and then you have Zilliax, so you can cheat a lot more easily. This just feels like such a amazing W for Warrior as well, for just Dragon Warrior in general, that I really don't know why aren't more people talking about this kind of card. If Priest gets some very impressive spells and Dragon support, this will be a 2-of in Priest without a problem. And again, Warrior has ways of destroying the Deathrattles guaranteed. So like, I had someone on my stream today that was like, well, what if the minion doesn't die? Now you can kill it guaranteed. So it's not even really a problem. I think that this card is like extremely good. It's just a matter of how exactly you build your deck. But oh my lord, this is going to be a great way of fishing out those very key Warrior cards for decks like Hydration Warrior. I just can't think of anything else. And like, something else you could technically do, you could put in the neutral legendary spell into the deck. You could do that, so that way you have a guaranteed tutor for those corrupt cards. But I don't really think it's really going to be that good compared to like another Hydration Station, or having that consistency of those particular cards that you really need for your game plan to work. So Fae Trickster is going to be a card that keeps, its stonks are going to keep getting better and better and better as more cards are revealed, but in Warrior, it already has a pretty good home. Next up, we have Petal Peddler, which is a 2 mana 1/4 dragon. At the end of your turn, give another random friendly dragon +1/+1. If we are going to be building an aggressive version of this deck, this is the only 2 mana dragon that is available in the neutral set for Warrior. So you also have some of the dragons from Whizbang's Workshop, like for example, the Gift Wrapped Whelp. If you have that card into this card and the Whelp actually hits this for value, by turn 2, you can have a 4/3 alongside a 2/5 that keeps giving another one of your minions +1/+1 at the end of the turn. That is a lot of stats and a lot of value. Now granted, it is a little bit of a, you need the 1 into the 2 as well as having a dragon to pop off with that. But it just feels like a really good amount of curve that's available for this type of deck, and it's just really hard to ignore how this is essentially Shadow Ascendant for dragon decks. And dragons originally, when Whizbang's Workshop came out, were very notoriously known for being very overstated very quickly. So I feel like there's a lot of potential for a card like this, especially in Zarimi Priest. But for the sake of this video talking about Warrior, you could easily run it in an aggro Warrior. Now, obviously, we are all aware of Ysera as well as its capabilities in Standard, because we've gotten the chance to play around with this card, and Warrior being able to increase its maximum mana cap without new heights is still a pretty good card to utilize. I feel like this card just makes a lot of sense in order to help us reach those high mana caps. But the reason why I'm even talking about Ysera in this video is because of Naralex. Naralex, Herald of Flights. You could potentially have some kind of combo to where you play Naralex into like Ysera in order to gain 3 mana, so that way any dragons that you want to play, you can play 3 dragons immediately. What if you wanted to do some kind of combo with your 10 mana dragon, with your Briarspawn Drake? What if there's a combo to where you make more copies of this, you do a Naralex into Ysera into triple Drake combo, and then that just wins the game. That is a legitimate OTK that could happen if armor decks are not aplenty and all over the metagame. That would just ruin the chances of that happening. But I just really wanted to showcase this potential combo because this is just scratching the surface of what could make Naralex really good in the game. In Hunter, you have cards like Parrot Sanctuary to where you can immediately pop off this card and get value off of it as early as turn 6 or turn 7. You have not a lot of other synergies that I thought about. I only can think about the Warrior and the Hunter one right now, and I'm not gonna come up with one on the spot. That's right, you guys stumped me. How about you guys let me know in the YouTube comments what you're looking forward to? Because this set is legitimately rekindling my hope for Hearthstone in terms of how it's going to look in this next year. These cards really do look fun. The board looks like it's finally going to matter, and we might actually have a few Hearthstone patches that hopefully won't be completely plagued by the same 3 decks. So fingers crossed. What are you guys looking forward to? Let me know in the comments below. Have a great day, and stay salty, my friends.